Evil in the world is a major problem for the atheist. Research by Jack Sandy. Narration by Kirk Bennett. Quite often the atheist brings up the problem of evil by asking the question, if God is all good and all powerful, why does he allow evil? Timothy Keller responds, the assertion that the world is filled with pointless evil is a hidden premise, namely that if evil appears pointless to me, then it must be pointless. The reasoning is, of course, fallacious. Just because you can't see or imagine a good reason why God might allow something to happen doesn't mean there can't be one. Keller acknowledges, horrendous inexplicable suffering, though it cannot disprove God, is nonetheless a problem for the believer in the Bible. But he counters this by saying, however, it is perhaps an even greater problem for non-believers. The following points will be covered in this order: atheistic beliefs, moral dilemma, significance dilemma, aesthetics dilemma, hope dilemma, and atheism's rationale. First is an overview of atheistic beliefs. We need to think through how this can be a greater issue for an atheist. What do most atheists believe? There is no God. Nature is all there is. There is no purpose in life. Neither evil nor good exist. There are no moral absolutes. Humans are the accidental byproducts of nature. Hope, fears, and love are the results of electrochemical reactions in the brain. All humans are destined for nothingness. Regarding morals, atheists reason, if human beings are merely chemical accidents, why should we be so concerned about what they do? We wouldn't get mad at baking soda for reacting with vinegar. That's just what chemicals do. If a bear grabs a fish from the river and kills it, it is not considered murder. And if an eagle tries to take the fish from the bear, it is not considered stealing. If we are made up of only atoms, it is absurd for atoms to discuss morality. One atom wouldn't complain to another atom, "Stop stealing my electrons!" By understanding the atheist's position, one can better understand the moral dilemma the atheist faces. Where do right and wrong ideas come from without a point of absolute reference? Moral law without an objective standard has no basis for right or wrong. Without the moral law, there would be no difference between Mother Teresa's actions and Adolf Hitler's actions. There are three implied results if the moral law does not exist. First, without a moral law, no culture could ever be judged as morally inferior. The slaughter of 6 million Jews in Nazi Germany could not be considered wrong. Secondly, ethical improvement becomes meaningless. The abolishment of slavery in the 1860s would not be seen as moral progress, but just different. Thirdly, there would be no justification for moral reformers. Martin Luther King's questioning the consensus of society would have no defense. A question for the atheist is, would it be wrong to torture babies for the fun of it? Or how about, was it wrong to deliberately fly planes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center with innocent people in them? To give the idea of the slippery slope when there is no moral standard, Peter Singer, professor of bioethics at Princeton University, taught the idea that infants should be able to be killed by their parents up to 28 days of age. 28 days is arbitrary. Why not 28 months or 28 years? Without a moral standard beyond themselves, there is no objective grounds for disagreement. There must be a moral standard beyond themselves. Gilberto Valle had fantasies about cannibalizing women. In one fantasy, he said he hoped to cook her over low heat, keeping her alive as long as possible. Randy Thornhill and Craig Palmer wrote that rape is a natural consequence of evolution. If only chemicals exist, then murder and rape cannot be wrong. A moral standard requires a transcendent lawgiver. If atheism's basic premises are true, there is no justification to condemn war, oppression, or crime as evil. If atheism's basic premises are true, what can be wrong about raping someone since it is natural in the animal kingdom? If atheism's basic premises are true, Hitler did nothing wrong. If atheism's basic premises are true, torturing a baby for the fun of it would not be wrong. Do people really believe in moral relativism? Lying isn't considered wrong, but people get morally outraged when lied to, especially about money. One may feel it is okay to break their promise, but get upset when being the recipient of a broken promise. One may think stealing or pilfering is okay, but gets upset if being stolen from? A moral standard is implied when people perceive other people doing wrong things in the world. Judging one set of moral ideas as better than another requires the use of a standard. There are 4 possible sources of moral law: nature's standard, personal standard, society's standard, and God's standard. First, nature's standard is described by Ravi Zacharias. The domination of the strong over the weak is not the abuse of natural selection, it is at the heart of it. Nature's standard is founded upon violence and is the basis for weak human beings being crushed by the strong. Second, personal standard is described by Jason Lyle. A person might choose for himself a moral code in which murder is perfectly acceptable. But how could we argue that it is wrong for others to murder if morality is nothing but a personal standard? If morality is a subjective personal choice, then Hitler cannot be denounced for his actions since he was acting in accord with his chosen standard. It is like 2 fish, with one telling the other, "Since there's no God, everybody can live by his own rules? My rules are that everybody should be loving and kind to each other." Chomp! The lone fish responds, "Apparently, I have different rules." Third, society's standard, according to Edward O. Wilson, is that humans have survived because of cooperative morals. The problem with cooperative morals is that Darwinism isn't an intelligent procedure. If survival is the end product, it is difficult for Darwinists to explain the self-destructive behavior involved in drugs, drinking, smoking, and suicide. Also, if survival is the end product, it is difficult for Darwinists to explain self-sacrifice for another. During the Nuremberg trials, when Nazi judges were placed on trial, the judges' defense was they were operating according to German law. The prosecution raised a valid counter-question, but is there not a law above the state law? None of the first 3 moral standards can answer the questions of why one ought to be moral, or who should determine morality. All 3 can be pitted against each other, and thus allow for courtroom defendants to plead not guilty by reason of cultural relativism. John Ashton and Michael Westacott wrote, "If we wish to condemn the actions of the past, slavery, the Holocaust, and so on, this moral standard must be eternal and unchanging. Therefore, there must exist an eternal, unchanging moral law that stands above all individuals, societies, and any world consensus. If there exists an eternal, unchanging moral law above all individuals, societies, and any world consensus, there must exist, as its cause, an eternal, unchanging moral lawgiver above all individuals, societies, and any world consensus." C.S. Lewis spoke on how he came to the position of the existence of a moral law. "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If you say there is evil, then there must be good to differentiate between the two. A moral law is needed to differentiate between good and evil. If there is a moral law, then there must be a moral lawgiver. If you are trying to disprove a moral lawgiver, then there can be no moral law. And if there is no moral law, there is no good. If good doesn't exist, then neither does evil exist. Even the writers of the Declaration of Independence understood a moral law given by a moral lawgiver in stating, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." Where do rights come from? If one chooses nature, it is based on violence. Choosing self can result in conflicts between people with countering morals. And there would be no ground for condemning Hitler. Choosing society can result in conflicts between states or societies with contradicting morals. Here, too, there is no ground for condemning Nazi Germany. The last choice is God. The atheist Friedrich Nietzsche coined the phrase, "God is dead," in 1882. As he thought through the implications of there being no God, he envisioned the annihilation of all meaning and value in life, leading toward devastation. What kind of devastation did it have on the 20th century? The 20th century has been the most bloodletting century in history. 190 million died in wars. Nietzsche writings influenced Hitler as his philosophical blueprint. From Darwinian theory, Hitler based his views of purging inferior races to protect the superior German race. Joseph Stalin sought to exterminate the substandard of the unschooled masses. What happens when anti-theism reigns? Blood has freely flowed throughout. Russia, China, and Germany offer atrocious examples. Stalin was responsible for 6 to 9 million deaths. Hitler was responsible for 11 to 12 million deaths. Mao was responsible for 30 to 80 million deaths. As we look at the chart, atheistic dogma was the foundation for 47% of people killed in wars. 29% is based on evolutionary dogma. Only 3% is based on religious dogma. According to Ravi Zacharias, these large-scale slaughters at the hands of anti-theists were the logical outworking of their God-denying philosophy. Contrastingly, the violence spawned by those who killed in the name of Christ would never have been sanctioned by the Christ of the Scriptures. I do not want to imply that all atheists are immoral, but without a moral standard to guide each decision, atheism provides every reason to be immoral. John Ashton and Michael Westacott state the bottom line for immorality. 1,000,000 years from now, will it really matter whether we lived our lives like Hitler, who slaughtered the innocent, or Mother Teresa, who cared for the helpless? Why should we refrain from evil and do good if there will be no lasting eternal significance to our actions? If atheists are right that God does not exist, then why not cheat, lie, and steal? Because life ends at death, and there are no consequences after death. According to Norman L. Geisler and Frank Turek, in the end, atheism cannot justify why anything is morally right or wrong. It cannot guarantee human rights or ultimate justice in the universe. To be an atheist, a consistent atheist, you have to believe that there is nothing really wrong with murder, rape, genocide, torture, or any other heinous act. Atheists have a moral ambiguity. Would it be considered immoral to inflict suffering on another? If the answer is yes, try explaining why in a satisfying manner. If the answer is no, what happens to our judicial system? Now we consider the significance dilemma. How can atheism provide a basis for human life being special? There would be nothing to set human beings apart from dogs or poison ivy or cockroaches. Ravi Zacharias writes, "To find their way, atheists must make sense out of a random first cause, denounce as immoral all moral denunciation, express meaningfully all meaninglessness, and find security in hopelessness." Atheist Richard Dawkins gives his take on what atheists hold to. There is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. According to the atheists, there is no meaning in life. Atheist Friedrich Nietzsche reasoned that truth, morality, and meaning were mere illusions. How can life have any significance if our lives are eventually meaningless? Our everyday activities would also be meaningless. William Lane Craig observes that man cannot live consistently and happily as though life were ultimately without meaning, value, or purpose. If we try to live consistently within the framework of the atheistic worldview, we shall find ourselves profoundly unhappy. Understanding that life is meaningless, atheists cannot live happily and consistently, so one pretends that life has significance in order to be happy. As the wife whispers to her husband, "Let's make believe we're blissfully married," he responds with the question, "To whom?" Francis Schaeffer adds, "The basic reason that drugs are seriously taken today is not for escape or kicks, but because man is desperate. On the basis of rationality and logic, man has no meaning, and culture is becoming meaningless." Friedrich Nietzsche wished he could be convinced against his own atheistic views. His last 11 years were spent insane. Now consider the topic of aesthetics dilemma. Ravi Zacharias describes the dilemma. The delights of love, the loveliness of a baby, the exquisite strains of majestic music, all these transcend reason yet have real meaning in our lives. What meaning do they have if life itself is meaningless? Timothy Keller states, "If there is no God and everything in this world is the product of an accidental collocation of atoms, then we are accidents. If we are the product of accidental natural forces, then what we call beauty is nothing but a neurological hardwired response to particular data." Furthermore, Keller writes, "You can't go on getting very serious pleasure from music if you know and remember that its air of significance is a pure illusion, that you like it only because your nervous system is irrationally conditioned to like it." And finally, Keller pens, "Love, too, must be seen in this light. If we are the result of blind natural forces, then what we call love is simply a biochemical response. As the lovers meet, one says to the other, 'I have an electrochemical reaction in my brain when I am near you.'" Next, the subject of the hope dilemma. Lauren Isley gives the stark reality to the end of life. You are the accidental byproduct of nature, a result of matter plus time plus chance. There is no reason for your existence. All you face is death. William Lane Craig describes the atheist's bleakness. The life of man is but a spark in the infinite blackness, a spark that appears, flickers, and dies forever. In death, what comfort can atheism offer? Atheist Bertrand Russell wrote, "Only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built." Finally, we deal with atheism's rationale. Nietzsche wrote, "It is our preference that decides against Christianity, not arguments." Aldous Huxley was forthright, stating, "We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom." Ravi Zacharias gives his view of atheism's rationale. "A man rejects God neither because of intellectual demands nor because of paucity of evidence. A man rejects God because of a moral resistance that refuses to admit his need for God." Atheist Bertrand Russell had three passions that controlled his life: longing for love, search for knowledge, and pity for mankind's suffering. At least two of these passions require a moral imperative. Where is it? Which comes first? The notion that no God exists, or the wish that there be no God with a moral standard? Ravi Zacharias sums up the unlivability of atheism. Can man live without God? Of course he can, in a physical sense. Can he live without God in a reasonable way? The answer to that is no, because such a person is compelled to deny a moral law, to abandon hope, to forfeit meaning, and to risk no recovery if he is wrong. Evil presents a major problem for atheists. Holding a view of a non-moral world denies evil's existence, but reacting to evil indicates that a moral law does exist and is thus a basis for a moral lawgiver. With no foundation for right or wrong, chaos can ensue. An atheist world is meaningless and leads to despair. What meaning could love, beauty, and music have? Life is but a flicker followed by death. In his teenage years, C.S. Lewis became an atheist because of his perception of a cruel and unjust God. Over the process of the next 15 years, he wrestled with what unjust meant. He concluded that if unjust exists, there must be something just to differentiate between the two. Thus, there must be a moral law to differentiate between just and unjust. If there is a moral law, then there must be a moral lawgiver. Lewis called himself a most reluctant convert to faith. He later wrote, "Mere Christianity and the Problem of Pain."